A recruiter's main job is to fill a position. By you saying, hey, I'm really good at this work and I've done this type of work, I have the skill sets, you're not being pushy. You're in fact doing them a favor by making yourself known that you can do the job that they're trying to fill. They're trying to fill a job. You're doing them a favor. So I think people need to see it in that perspective as well too. That when you're reaching out to individuals, you're reaching out to folks, you're actually helping them solve that problem, and it's going to go a long way.
Hello, and welcome to the Dragon Tree Podcast, the show where we talk to great communicators about how they do what they do. I'm your host, Chris Hobson, and today we're speaking with Timothy Lowe. Tim has worked for several top-tier international consulting firms throughout his career, and in 2015, he founded Your Next Jump. Through Your Next Jump and other programs, Tim and his team provide career counseling and training, as well as career transition guidance. Thank you so much for joining me today, Tim.
Yeah, great to be here, Chris.
Well, we talked last time and about the great work that you all and your team do at Your Next Jump. And I'm for anyone who maybe didn't see that conversation, could you please catch people up on what you all do?
Yeah, basically, probably the easiest way to explain what we do is we are a professional branding company. So we want to help people as they get ready for the job search to really make sure that they're marketing themselves as best as possible, making sure that they have a strategy that is both thought out, systematic, and most importantly, effective in terms of targeting the job search. In particular, right now the job market is pretty difficult, pretty challenging, and so making sure that people have a very clear plan of action is what we want to help our clients do.
Since we last talked, there have been significantly more layoffs throughout all segments of the economy, as you just alluded to, particularly in the public sector. I just so happened to turn on the news today, and I saw Paramount Studios has like laying off 1,000 people. So it's not. I think the headlines that are grabbing attention right now are the government, but it really is happening across a lot of sectors, both private and public.
Yeah.
So in addition to your regular work at Your Next Jump, I know you and your team have been running a program especially directed at former government workers called the FedEx strategy. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about how that works.
Yeah, absolutely. It came about. Actually, my wife is a federal employee herself, and actually she's transitioning out. So she just got a job at Capital One, which she's going to start in a few
Oh.
weeks. And so back in February, when all this cuts started happening, my wife reached out to me. She said, "Hey, you run a lot of webinars for transitioning teachers, transitioning veterans. It might be time for you to really put together something for federal workers as you're trying to think through." How they might market themselves in something that they are, completely, um, unplanned for, right? So most federal workers didn't plan on making any types of changes, and now all of a sudden, so many of them are forced to do that. And so the question is, how do you do that, especially as they explore opportunities in the private sector? Which already is very very saturated. As you know, lots of layoffs, not just at Paramount, but Amazon just announced a large a layoff, and Amazon is a huge employer where Chris, you and I are here in the Washington D.C. area, along with other companies. I think a lot of companies just I think there's a lot of factors, including AI and other things, but a lot of it is just unsure about planning. People don't feel confident about the direction of the economy, and I think and that's a real challenge for a lot of employers. And so typically when they feel that, they'll want to cut back. But back to the question about the Fed exit strategy, mainly is just to really help give some clarity, and really give some confidence, especially at a time when a lot of federal workers might feel um, maybe confusion. Things might seem really chaotic. So helping them put together mentally how they might want to approach a job search in the private sector and how they would market themselves effectively in that realm. So.
Well, and just to stay on this point for a minute, how have you all had to adjust, or have you had to adjust, given just the kind of deluge of layoffs in the public sector? Have you had to sort of reallocate your precious resource of time towards that more of that audience, or is that something you were already doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Just being based out of the DC area, we worked with a lot of folks that were not necessarily federal, but federal adjacent, a lot of federal contractors just in the past. And so And so we have a lot of familiarity and understanding. Especially, I was a federal government worker in the past. That's how I started my career. Really, great times that I remember being a civil servant. And so, um, I think for us, it's really not so much allocation of time, but just really thinking, really understanding what are the needs of our clients, what are the needs of our, and a lot of them aren't even, paying clients. I mean, we run this webinar called Fed Exit Strategy that I run, 6 to 7 times a month, and it's free. But more importantly, it's very practical, very applicable, helping folks think through that marketing aspect. So, for example, if we have time, I was working with someone at USAID.
Oh,
And so obviously an agency that has just been cut. And so at
right.
USAID, one of her main role for the last 2 decades was working for an organization or an office within there that worked on combating human trafficking. And so when she came to us, she said, "Hey, Tim, like the last 2 decades, what I've been focusing on is combating human trafficking." And she said, "There's nothing in the private sector that does any of this type of work. Maybe a few nonprofits, mostly saturated with a lot of folks." And she said, "I don't even know where to start." And she said, "How do I market myself with this very government specific type background towards something in the private sector?" And, I thought about it for a second and I said, well, let's not really talk about what you do. Let's talk about how you do it. So I said, okay, you worked for the last 20 years on combating human trafficking. How did you do it? And she said, oh, well, the way that I did it is, my job was to look at a lot of data and data that was supporting
Uh-huh.
this area, tell the story behind data, be able to help executives, policymakers who are allocating funds and resources to different types of organizations and nonprofits that are helping us do this at USAID. That's what I did. And I said, okay, so what you really are is you are a data scientist or a data specialist or data analyst. And so let's focus on that and market not necessarily what you did, but really how you did it. And those skill sets become very, very, all of a sudden, extremely relevant to what the private sector is looking for. So just helping people, and I know that's a little bit of a simple mind shift, but helping people kind of think through that and really prepare in that sense. So
Since last time we talked, have people's top concerns with respect to trying to rejoin the labor market changed, and if so, how?
yeah, definitely. Again, it's a really saturated market across, and not just in the Washington D.C. area, but really across all industries, pretty much across all industries. And so, one of the things that I tell people is, look, there's no magic, right? There's no magic wand that we can wave to make you all of a sudden the most, the most effective or the most attractive client. But there are things that are within your control, and there are a lot of things that are outside of your control. And actually, I think that the most important piece of advice that I think that I give to other folks isn't necessarily on like how to write the resume or how to run a job search. Though I think networking, of course, is really important. But what I tell them is, your mindset is this, and I even tell people like make a list, like things that you can control, things that you cannot control. And there's a giant list of things that you cannot control, right? People always come to me and say, "Hey, Tim, I'm worried about my age, or or I've been in the government my whole entire career, or I'm worried if this company's even going to hire, if they're looking. I'm worried about how many other people are applying. Every job I look at on LinkedIn, it says there's like 400 other people applying." And I said, let me ask you a question. Can you control any of those factors? Can you control if someone is going to discriminate against you because of your age? Can you, change the fact that you've had this gap in your career? Can you, control how many other people are applying, how well they perform? The answer is no. You can't control any of those things. So every second, every minute that you spend thinking about those things is really taking away from time on things that you can control. And so the question is, what are those things that you can control? And those things that you can control really are going to be, number one is how you market yourself, right? Obviously, when you write your resume, there's still going to be, dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen, even if there's 500 other people applying, there's still going to be a lot of other people that are either just as qualified or more qualified than you. How you represent yourself, making it easy for them to see, making sure that they don't have to spend time building a case for you. that's something that is within your control, something we can help with. That's a lot of what we talk about in our webinars. Number two, what you can control is how you run your job search, right? Most people submit their resume, kind of wait to hear back. And right now in this market, there's 400, 500, 600 people doing exactly the same things. Those are really hard odds to break through, right? If there's 300 people, one out of 300, that's less than one third of 1%. So what you can really do to help yourself is really incorporate that networking piece. And we talk a lot about, on a very practical level on my webinars, what does networking mean? Because a lot of people use that term, oh, you need to network more, but what exactly does networking mean? And so we talk a lot about that so that everyone who walks away should have a very clear plan of action as to, okay, tomorrow morning when I open up my laptop and I start my job search, this is what I need to be spending my time on, and this is how I do it.
And really, when you were just talking, it brought to mind a recent example I saw on your feed where you were advising people to start their resume kind of not with their work experience or like an objective professional statement, like a lot of people are taught. But like more like a headline, like something that you would see in almost like a newspaper, and that really made me sit up and think. Can you please explain what you meant by that?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So, the main objective of a resume, and people always ask me, should my resume be one page or two page? Should I do this or that? I think going back to the beginning and thinking about what is the purpose of the resume, and the purpose of the resume is to make the job of whoever's looking at your resume easy. So you make my job easy, there's just always going to be a higher chance that your resume moves forward. If it's difficult, even if you're really qualified, and there's tons of qualified people that when you pick up their resume, it just takes time for me to build that case for you. Chances are I'm going to move on, especially when I'm looking at so many different types of candidates and there's so many people that are presumably very qualified as well too. Don't make my job difficult. You want to focus on looking for ways to make my job easy. And so, one of the easiest things that you can do to make someone's job easy is open up your resume, not necessarily by showing people your background and all of that, but really just straight up telling them, right? And so, when you open up a newspaper like the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, whatever it is that you read, there's like 40 articles. Why do you choose to read a particular article? Because of the headline. The headline catches your
Right.
attention within really half a second as you're scanning. You open up the newspaper, you scan it, and then you decide very quickly whether to read an article or not. And what that headline does is it doesn't just make your resume relevant, but it has the ability to make your resume instantly relevant. And so if there's an instant relevancy to your resume and I look at it and I'm like, oh, this looks like what I'm looking for, all of a sudden the goal that you're trying to accomplish is to get them to look at your resume and not spend some time on other people's resume. You've accomplished that goal because that headline matches, and then right below that you want to have very specific bullets that are supporting that headline. And then by the time you get through halfway through the first page of your resume, at that point, that's when you talk about where you worked, how those things tie in. Because chances are places that you've worked, things like that, they don't always tie in exactly. You have the skills and the competencies, maybe not the exact experience, but that headline can really help show that you have those skills, those competencies that they're looking for.
And I wonder, could you provide like an example of what you mean? And again, this is on your feed, so
Yeah.
I do recommend people go there. But maybe even that really great example you gave earlier of the person who was helping with human trafficking in a data analysis capacity. Maybe the old way or the sort of former way of doing it would be, this is what I did, and
Yeah.
then you were trying to get her to say, kind of get beyond that.
Yeah.
So, is there what would I mean, just off the top of your head,
Yeah.
is there a headline that
Yeah.
springs to mind?
So for her, when she opened up her resume, and I don't remember exactly the words, but it was something like, uh, um, I don't remember what her title was. Maybe it was like senior project manager or like program management analyst, something that the government had. She would say, a senior program, analyst with over 2 decades of experience, working for an office that, for the office that combats human trafficking, et cetera, et cetera. It would open up with a kind of a chunky paragraph.
Mm.
And so we said, look, this is what you do, and it's true. Okay. And if you were applying for a job that was very similar, maybe in the same agency or whatever, this might work. But the thing is, if you're going to apply for a job, and she was looking for jobs in the private sector, right? She was looking at a job at Marriott. Okay. And Marriott was looking to build hotels in Africa, some regions of Africa. And they wanted someone to understand data, understand some, global, issues, security, things like that. working for USAID. Certainly, she had that background, but Marriott isn't interested in necessarily, combating human trafficking. They just want to know, should we build hotels in this region? And what they were looking for is someone who could look at data, large data sets, try to tell the story behind data. And so, because of the way that she did her work, even though she worked for an office that, combated human trafficking, what she really was, she was a data scientist. She was looking at data to help do that work that she was, doing as part of that job. And so the way that we opened up her resume, we just opened up with, you know senior data scientist, right, or something like that, that describes what they're looking for. And then there was a subset of how to look at data or certain types of data tools that they use, which is happened to be the same tool that they use at Marriott. Then we
Oh,
just put blah blah
okay.
blah blah, expertise, whatever that tool was. I don't remember what it was, but so opening up like that, and all of a sudden, so Marriott, when they see that resume, they're not seeing USAID, human trafficking, which is not necessarily wrong, but it just takes some time to, well, how does that fit in with what we're doing? Whereas if you open up with a headline, that says senior data scientist, and that's exactly what they're hiring for, with expertise in that specific tool that they're looking for, or those types of tools that they're looking for, all of a sudden you've captured their attention, right? And you're being 100% honest on the resume, because you're opening up with the skills and the competencies that they are looking for, not necessarily opening up with your experience. Of course, you're going to get to the experience. Of course, Marriott's going to see halfway down the first page, oh, she's at USAID and she worked for the office that combated human trafficking. But how does she do that job? And did she do that job well? Was she leaving because she's really bad at what she does, or is she really good? And that's where we go into the details of what she did, but not just what she did, but really how well she did it. And but people come to me often, they're like, hey Tim, do I need a new resume for every job that I apply to? And the answer is no. I mean, I think if you follow sort of the format that we do, you need to adjust your resume every time you apply to a job, but it doesn't mean you need a whole new resume. The way that we write the resume, the way we lay it out, if you join any of my webinars, you'll see, is when we open up with that headline and we open up with those skills and those competencies, that needs to be adjusted and tweaked as you apply to different jobs. But where you worked, the fact that she worked at USAID and she was a senior program manager or whatever her title was, that's not going to change no matter what job she applies to, what her title was, and what her accomplishments were at USAID for that role. That's really not going to change. So it's really going to be, if we can visualize it, and you can see it on my webinars, the first half of the first page where we talk about that headline, those core competencies, and those three, sort of summary bullets that really support that headline. Those things are what you want to adjust every time you apply to a position.
And I do encourage people to join Tim's webinar and Your Next Jump's webinars. I did myself, and they really bring it to life. To kind of make it almost applicable across the board. And I guess that kind of plays into my next question. Are there any other practical pieces of advice, kind of in that same vein, that you could tell people right now that can even just provide a starting point?
Yeah, I think the resume piece, it's if you kind of hit those two goals that I talked about, right, making the job of whoever's reading your resume easy, and then also the other goal is, showing people not just what you do, but really showing people how well you do it, right? People don't want to know that you were, a project manager, or that you're an IT specialist. What they really want to know is that you're a very good one, especially in this market, because chances are people who are applying for those jobs that you're applying to probably have very similar backgrounds, or they might have very similar backgrounds. So what is one way for you to stand out is to not just talk about what you do, but really showing people how well you do it. And that's the resume piece. But I think the most important part, besides the advice of, being focused on what you can control and trying to, as much as possible, table those things that you cannot control mentally. Um, I think the other piece of advice is really doing that networking piece. And networking is really the only shortcut to the job search. And what I would recommend people do is, most people go online, they find job postings, they go on LinkedIn or Career Builder, ZipRecruiter, they find job postings, they submit their resume. But if you think about it, there's 500, 600 people applying for every job. Again, those are hard odds to break through. One of the very practical things that could help you break into that faster is to really doing that networking piece, where you're not just applying for a job, but you're reaching out to somebody within the organization. You're asking for the conversation. You're not asking for the job initially, but you find folks, like if you're interested in Capital One, right? And you were State Department, search for people who previously worked at State Department who are now at Capital One, reach out to them. You're not asking for a job. You're just saying, hey, I'd love to chat with you. I saw that you made a great transition. It looks like you've had a great run, at Capital One. Would love to learn a little bit more about your transition story. Would you have, 5, 10 minutes to chat with me? I'd love to just, grab coffee or, hop on the phone call with you or whatever. And then once you have those conversations, they can either help find hiring managers or they can help find recruiters that can help, all of a sudden, instead of applying to jobs, you're getting invited to apply to a job, right? And they say, oh, yeah, actually, there's a position that I'm looking for. And remember, if you think about it, when you're doing this with recruiters and you're making yourself known and you're being proactive, like a recruiter's main job is to fill a position. By you saying, hey, I'm really good at this work and I've done this type of work, I have the skill sets, you're not being pushy. You're in fact doing them a favor by making yourself known that you can do the job that they're trying to fill. They're trying to fill a job. You're doing them a favor. So I think people need to see it in that perspective as well too. That when you're reaching out to individuals, you're reaching out to folks, you're actually helping them solve that problem, and it's going to go a long way. So almost all of our clients who do that networking piece, they just find jobs in less than half the time that other people who are just submitting their resume.
I really have benefited from a lot of your wisdom over time because I used to be, and I still probably am to some extent, but I really used to be one of those people who kind of cringed at at the networking part.
Yeah,
Because I mean, by trade, I'm a writer, editor,
yeah,
sort of more on that end of the spectrum, I guess. And so part networking was always kind of a challenge for me. But in through your helpful webinars and just learning more about how you all do what you do. Um, I that helped shift my mindset to the point of like, if I can have a few relevant and this goes not just to the job search, but if you're just networking in general,
yeah,
if you're just trying to make connections with people, being relevant to what they do. And I think this also plays into the headline, what you're talking about. It's doing people, maybe recruiters work for them to an extent. It's kind of helping facilitate that process
yeah,
instead of you just kind of almost like cold calling someone. It's
yeah,
like you've done your homework. You're coming to them with a
yep,
proposition almost
yeah,
that's very much aligned with what they're looking for. And
yeah,
I think if you can start doing that, that was the secret key for me that got me over that maybe mental block.
yep,
And I've used that just to network professionally, irregardless of the the job search.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I really encourage people to take. Hopefully, they will take that bit of wisdom from you
Yeah.
today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that, Chris. I mean, at the end of the day, when we talk about sales, whether you own your own business and you're trying to sell your services, people always say don't sell. What you're trying to do is you're trying to solve people's problems. In the same way as a potential employee, you're trying to solve your employer's problems and you're letting them know, hey, you're putting out a job listing because you have a gap. You have a problem that you want to have solved. I can help you do that. And this is how I can do that. So
Then it becomes more of a conversation in some sense,
exactly. Yeah.
as opposed to you just making demands. But if we can shift just a minute to the actual job interview process, which I know you have a lot of really helpful insight into. Instead of one thing you say is instead of trying to memorize answers to potential interview questions, we've all been there, we've all done that. That you suggest that people instead try to figure out a little bit of what we've been talking about. Try to figure out what the employer is looking for in a candidate and kind of cast everything in that light. So can you please kind of play that out and explain what that means a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. Whenever I talk about, say, like interview preparation, one of the things that I like to do, whether it's actually resume writing or interview preparation, is I say, try to reverse engineer the process, right? Think about what they want. What do they, when we write a resume, oftentimes we think about, okay, what do I want to say? I want to write about my career. I want to, highlight all these things. And we oftentimes think about what we want versus what they want. And in this market where it's very much a buyer's market and not a seller's market, in terms of selling your services, or who you are, you really understand, you need to understand what the buyer wants, right? What do they want to hear? What do they need to see on your resume in the interview? And so when you think about the interview, there's a lot of questions that you're going to be asked, and there's a lot of questions you can't prepare for because a lot of times we do mock interviews and you prepare for 16 questions and then they ask the question in a different way or they ask completely different questions. And so what we really want to focus on is what do they what will they want in an ideal candidate, right? In the interview process. And by the time you get to an interview, you can feel pretty confident that they feel like what you have on your resume, what you've written, is somebody that they want. Okay, they're just trying to verify some of those things, and one of the things that they're really trying to verify that they can't really get out of the resume, which we hopefully will get out of an interview, or more out of an interview, is do we want to work with this person? And that's where you're going to get a lot of questions that aren't always technical. Sometimes they ask technical questions, right? Tell me about a time you use this tool, or you mentioned that you manage large scale projects. Tell me a little bit more about that. And they're just trying to verify. But what they're really wanting to do in an interview often is, do we want to work with Chris? Right? So, Chris, tell me about a time when you had conflict with a coworker, or you and your supervisor disagree on the direction of how this project would work. How would you handle that type of situation? Or what is your greatest weakness? Or, they'll give you scenarios of different things because they know when we bring Chris into this situation or we hire him, there's going to be situations where some things are complicated. We want to know, is he a team player? Is he somebody that's, going to get along? Or is he going to be challenging us all the time in not good ways? And so when we think about that, we always want to use that lens of, character and chemistry and competency, and how do we put all of that together? And really, when you do that, you can almost answer any question looking at it through that lens, right, of character, chemistry, and competencies. So,
I like that too because that plays to the storytelling aspect that a lot of people,
yeah,
whether or not they're good storytellers themselves, it's very innately human to respond to stories.
yeah.
So I think that's I don't know. I've always kind of looked at it that way. If you can tell like a compelling story about something that really happened to you, and usually I think that puts you in the mindset of being genuine anyway.
No, I agree. Yeah, storytelling is so effective, and it makes you human too, right? So, when you're asked questions,
Yeah.
what is your greatest weakness? You could answer your that question with just an answer. Oh, my greatest weakness is that I micromanage, right? But then if you don't expand on it, or you don't tell a story behind it, or you don't talk about how, yes, this is really an obstacle in your life. This is a struggle that you've had, and this is how you overcame it, right? People love to hear that story of how you worked through it, how you went through different types of trials, whatever it is to work through to get to a place where you're a better person, because that is where we talk about character, right? That is when we talk about somebody who has the chemistry that we're looking for, right? Because it's not just, okay, I have weaknesses. Everyone can identify their own weaknesses. That's not hard. But how do you work to overcome that, to make sure that those weaknesses don't hurt the team? That you are better off now than you were before because of those weaknesses. How did you grow and improve as a person? Like, those are the things that people want to see. And that's what makes any story interesting. Whenever you watch a movie, there's always going to be that climax, and you're building up to that. There's always this problem, and then you're figuring it out, the challenges, how you overcome the challenges. That story of perseverance, I think, is also really important as well too. And making things that are relatable and human, right? And that's why I always say, bring emotions into the conversation whenever you talk about interviewing, right? You could talk about project management and how well you project manage, but really talk about things that you like, right? People want to hire people who like what they do. I really like project management. I know that sounds a little bit weird, but when we work through the intersection of, those things, the budget, the scope, putting all those things together, like it's really satisfying to be able to walk away and do something like that. And I tell people all the time, like, for example, I'm a big hockey fan. I love ice hockey. I play ice hockey. I watch ice hockey. I'm not a big baseball fan, minus, the playoffs, like, watching the World Series last night was really, really fun. But
Yeah.
like, I have a friend who played college baseball. He loves baseball. He was a pitcher. And then he has a friend that he played with in college who's like in the majors, but really kind of moves from the majors to the minors. And the whole story. I don't love baseball, but I love going to baseball games with this friend. His name is Tyler.
Oh.
I love going to baseball games with him. Why? Because he loves baseball, right? He
Ah,
exudes that passion. He's like, hey, Tim,
right.
look at the scoreboard. There's used to be, I don't know if you remember, there used to be like 3 stats. Now there's like 10 different stats. Here's why. Do you remember see the movie Moneyball? And, here's the story behind it and all this stuff, right? And then he's like, yeah, my friend, is a pitcher. And we went to go see him when he pitched. It was like super exciting. And he's like, yeah, these are the types of hotels they stayed at. I stayed with him one time, and this is how the team works, and then you have to spend this many days in the major in order to to earn time towards your retirement and being in the majors. But then when you sent down to the minors
Oh,
or whatever, like just all the story and all the background and just the
wow.
excitement and the passion, like I who someone who doesn't love baseball, I get sucked into it, right? And so that passion,
Right.
yeah, that passion is contagious. And so people love that. People love talking to people who love what they do. So one of the things is I do tell people to think about some stories that they might want to share in an interview and then
Okay.
work on ways to make it a little bit more succinct. But
Mm.
what is the point of the story, right? If the point of the story is just to tell a story, maybe that's not important. But if the point of the story is to highlight a point about whether it's your weaknesses or a point about how you overcome challenges, try to think about ways to make that story succinct, but also at the same time being meaningful. And I think it's important. I mean, most people that I work with have trouble, getting to that and maybe don't talk too much, or if they talk too much, it might be out of just nervousness. Um,
Ah,
so I think helping people prepare for that, think about what some of those questions may be, but also prepare that for questions that you might be asked that are not not what you prepare for specifically, but that given that you have that lens, you're able to think, oh, okay, character, chemistry, competency, this is what it means, this is what people want to see. If you can get the behind the why of why they're asking those questions, I think that's where you can really win. So
yeah, it's almost like, plot points in a movie or something like
yeah,
that.
yeah,
You don't wanna be so on the nose, obviously,
yeah.
but, like, yeah, it's if you can just keep that at front of mind of the point, I think that's great advice. And we'll put a link to your LinkedIn page and, I know as we're recording this, this is early November, I know you've got at least, I believe, 3 FedEx strategy webinars set up and among other things, so we'll
Yeah,
make sure to link to all that in the show notes, give people
excellent.
an opportunity to enroll in that. And I guess looking forward, I mean, you're out there all the time and gauging what's happening in the labor market. And I'm wondering what trends are you noticing? We've talked a little bit about it already, but where do you see the labor market? This is going to be an impossible question to
Yeah.
answer, but just in your judgment, where do you see the labor market going maybe over the next 6 months?
Yeah, over the next 6 months, I don't see things getting better. I see probably things probably getting worse before they get better. Um, Again, you know, companies like when there's predictability, when they can predict or they can plan. And right now, I think most companies and organizations are really struggling with planning. They don't know, the direction, what the administration is going to do in this particular area. So I think there's a lot of things where companies are just struggling to do that. And I think the reflection that we're going to see in the job market is, whenever they can't plan, they're going to be more conservative. They're going to save cash. They're going to make sure, that they can weather this storm. And part of weathering that storm is either letting people go or cutting back on hiring and growth. Because anytime you do growth, there's some level of risk, and you want to enter into risk in an environment that is as predictable as possible. But if we are in an environment that is extremely unpredictable, which I think most people feel is very unpredictable right now, then the tolerance for risk is going to go down, and therefore hiring and all those other things will follow. And so, but again, buckle down. There's a term called job hugging. I don't know if you heard that, but people are hugging their jobs, meaning that if you have a job, they're kind of holding on to it. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be looking if you really intend to look. It's just, let's just be strategic, make sure what you do is systematic. What you're putting out there reflects you in the best light possible. It's really great to be able to test that market, but if you already have a job, it's a lot easier to test that market. So
I like how that kind of plays into the predictability. You said it's that for and we've talked about this to a large extent today. It's very unpredictable environment for employees or potential employees. It's also that way for the employers, as you said, kind of closer to the top of the
yeah,
show today. And from in my mind, I'm like, that's really interesting because if you can structure your resume kind of along the lines of provide a headline, do some of the recruiters work for them, that not only does that provide a little measure of predictability for you as the maybe job seeker, but it also provides a level of predictability for the employer and the or the recruiter or both,
yeah,
in that they can maybe they have this kind of bedrock from which to work,
yeah,
and maybe bringing you along for an interview process or maybe beyond.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, and I think, and this is where, why things like networking and things are so important because of the jobs that are available, right? There's always going to be a human component, making yourself available, making yourself known, um, you know, keeping those relationships warm, either with a recruiter or a hiring manager or someone within an organization that you're interested in being a part of or exploring opportunities there. Um, not just being one of 500 resumes that come in, but really warming up those relationships. I think that's where, you're going to give yourself the best chance, right? And also those conversations, they lead to things that you never expect. They can lead to things that you don't expect, and open doors that you didn't even think about. And so, always, I always tell people, like, if you're presented a menu, always take a look, right? And just, see what's available.
I think this is a really positive note to end on, Tim. Thank you so much for joining us today and providing your insight. If anyone wants to continue this important conversation, how can they reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. They can schedule a call with me on my website. So if you go to yournextjump.com, and just on the top right, you can there's a button that says schedule a call, or join any of my webinars. And I run 4 different webinars for just different demographics of job seekers. If you just go to yournextjump.com/webinar, yournextjump.com/webinar, you'll see all the webinars there. Just make sure to register, then that way you'll get all the meeting information and everything. And yeah, and anytime you have any questions, just reach out. And also, if you're listening to this podcast, if you like what you hear, connect with me on LinkedIn as well too. I try to post there, as Chris mentioned, just advice that I think might be helpful as people start to think through different things. And yeah, so
Yeah, I highly Tim is very responsive, so I highly recommend you reach out to him if you have further questions.
awesome.
So thank you so much, Tim. Really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Chris.